Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from 2 Point Capital Management, proud supporter of WXXI Public Media, believing that local journalism, music, and the arts foster connection and community. 2 Point Capital Management, life opens up. And Laurelwood Assisted Living at the Highlands at Pittsford, an affiliate of University of Rochester Medicine, offering daily support and enrichment activities in a connected residential community. More at highlandsatpittsford.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made on a small but valuable piece of land in the city of Rochester, half an acre large, located in the East End, right across from Ugly Duck Coffee, not far from the Little Theater and Red Restaurant. Right now it's open space, but a recent proposal from Hinge Neighbors called for the site to be used for affordable housing. In the last several weeks, hundreds of neighbors in the area have signed petitions against affordable housing. Some argued that they support more housing, but they want this particular piece of land to remain undeveloped. They say it's become a community gathering space, that more could be done there, and that it's important to the character of the area. Rochester City Council member Michael Patterson didn't buy that argument during recent debates, or community meetings, I should say. And to him, this was really about racial segregation. He challenged his colleagues on council to support more affordable housing, knowing that will mean a more diverse neighborhood in the future.
The majority of the people who get Section 8 vouchers in this county are black and brown. Now, with the other housing developments that we do, I'm just going to say it. I ain't got no white people trying to move on Vaux Street. I ain't got no white folks knocking down the door to get into our buy the block programs. It just doesn't happen. Okay? But you know what? I bet you I'm going to have some low-income white folks who are going to be coming into this, and I'm good with it. But I also know that the majority of the people who are going to be income eligible for this are going to be black and brown people. That's who's coming, y'all. That's who you're voting against. You know, it's amazing to me. You know, introductory number 104, authorizing sale of real estate. You vote against that. You vote against selling the school to be a school because you want more housing. And now you're telling me on this item, you're opposed to doing housing in a space that's built for development because you'd rather it stayed a vacant space. Make it make sense. All it can be is segregation. I guess now and forever? I hope not. I'm hoping we can get 7 votes to do the right thing. I'm hoping we can get 7 votes for integration. I'm hoping we can do that. I'm hoping we can find a way. But if we don't, man, isn't that a judgment on us?
In the end, the proposal passed Rochester City Council 7-2. The 2 no votes came from Mary Lupian, who represents that part of the city, and Stanley Martin. And in some ways, this could be a preview of debates and conversations that could happen in other neighborhoods as more development possibilities come up. We've asked council members to come in and talk about their votes and talk about what they heard from the community and how that might have affected their thinking on this. Mary Lupian and Stanley Martin are unavailable this hour, but we have some of their comments on video at recent meetings, and we'll share their perspective that way. Joining us in studio, let me welcome the president of Rochester City Council, Miguel Meléndez, Jr. Welcome back to the program, Miguel.
Thanks for having me.
Mitch Gruber is a member of Rochester City Council. Thank you for being here.
Greetings.
Let me ask the president of council. I mean, those are strong words from your colleague, Michael Patterson, that this was a vote about extending segregation in that part of the city or integrating. Is it that simple to you? Do you agree with that characterization?
I don't think it's that simple, but certainly that plays a role into some of my thinking on this too. This was really a site that has been slated for development for a long period of time. In fact, it wasn't not too long ago. It was just rubble and a fenced-in gravel site. And the Evans administration decided to green it temporarily in an effort to appease the neighbors, but also to have the site be a positive asset, I guess, for the neighborhood while we continued to pursue the development opportunities. And it was always clear that this was temporary. And for me, as we look at the housing crisis that we face in communities, not just in the city of Rochester, but across the country, whenever you have an opportunity to develop home ownership, and particularly home ownership for people at 60% AMI, to me, it's and to add in-laws and ADUs into the project. That's just an amazing example of what we can do in the city of Rochester, and to do it in a neighborhood where the moment you turn the key, that family's going to maintain or gain equity in the property. That's a huge win and victory for the city. So that all factored into my support of this.
Councilmember Gruber, how would you characterize what this was all about?
Well, first of all, I wish that Councilmember Patterson were here to join, because I think his perspective is naturally going to be different than mine or Miguel's, in part because of his role as a district council member in the Northeast. I also wish that our colleague, Councilmember LaShonda Leslie Smith, was able to join. I know she sends her regrets, but she had some really important words to share during that meeting too. And I'd encourage folks to go and listen to the council meeting. It's probably not something everyone loves to do, but I said it at the meeting and I believe it. This was some of the best discourse that we've had as a council and frankly as a community in my 9 years of doing this job. For me, this really is about density. I think density is a good thing. It's not necessarily a blanket good thing. There are some neighborhoods that simply weren't built for density, and that makes it challenging. But the Inner Loop East was built for density. That lot was meant to be developed, and the only reason it wasn't was because of some financing troubles the developer had in COVID, frankly. So to me, this is a question about density or not density. And I want to say something that I'm going to try to come back to a couple times on this show. This is a really hard thing to say and describe, so I'm going to do it as kind of slowly as I can. The neighbors who were advocating for this lot to stay green, this is, I think, where Councilmember Patterson and I might disagree a little bit. The neighbors who are arguing for it to stay green, I completely understand where they're coming from. It makes perfect sense that people would argue for a lot to stay green that they use, that brings them peace, that brings them tranquility and serenity, that frankly is good for their physical health to feel and see green and grass and trees. I don't begrudge anyone for feeling that way. Separately, my colleagues who have an opportunity to vote to increase affordable housing, home ownership opportunities in a part of our city that desperately needs to have more affordable options to help deconcentrate poverty in Rochester, to me, it is a no-brainer that this should have been a 9-0 vote. And what's a bit concerning to me is that we're going to see a lot more of this in the next year, because we are going to be asked to vote on our zoning code, and every neighborhood is going to have these issues. Well, we understand the need for density, but not here, do it somewhere else. And they're valid arguments from the individuals, but we as legislators need to be able to look at the holistic picture.
In a moment, you're going to hear some of the comments made at recent meetings of City Council by the members who did vote no. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel on WXXI News, I think we just shared, and we can you'll probably see it again, that overhead photo, that aerial photo, so you can see the lot that we're talking about. And in the bottom right of that photo, there's Ugly Duck Coffee, a couple shops there, the Little Theater in red are off to the right. And so you're seeing, and then there's Charlotte Street and housing on the left there. So that's what we're looking at here. And before we listen to the comments of the council members who voted no, let me ask both of you, I'll start with you, Mitch, because when you say that this discussion, this debate, if you will, is likely to be replicated in different parts of the city in the months to come, is this a NIMBY issue to you, a not in my backyard issue?
It's more complicated than that, but it is for some.
Is that part of it?
It is in some ways. I mean, what you'll hear probably in some of the clips is several of the people highlighted the 800 to 900 signatures on a petition against this project.
That's right.
But let's be clear about something. I looked at every one of those petitions because I'm nuts. And many of them were signed in December of 2025. This is before the Evans administration had selected the Hinge Neighbors proposal. It may have even been before they submitted it. So it's not as though these petitions were people saying, I want green space versus this project. It was asking people to sign a petition and say, do you like the space green? If you do, click here. And people did it. So we need to be able to discern what are people asking for. And again, we need to also be able to discern what are we hearing from a small from a single neighborhood versus what is the overall picture. And to me, for NIMBY is I think is it's a very, very weighted and pregnant term at this point. So I'm going to choose to look at it in a different fashion. We have a housing crisis. There's not a single council member or probably a single legislator anywhere in this country, in a city, who doesn't acknowledge a housing crisis. There is one single best way to address the housing crisis, and that is build more housing. And it is not for the people who are living in the neighborhood to necessarily know that or see that, but it is for legislators who have to vote on these things to see and know that.
Okay. And President Meléndez, do you see this as do you think that there is a concern about the perspective that, well, sure, I'm for more housing, just not here? And was that driving a lot of the opposition? Or do you agree with your colleague who I think is raising an interesting question, which is, yeah, there were 800 plus signatories to this petition against this, or ostensibly against it. The question of how many of those folks would say, no, like, look, if you're asking me if I like it green, I like it green. But if you want me to weigh that against a housing proposal, that's a different thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixed bag on this too. Certainly the number of individuals who came to speak to council were actually in favor of the project itself, just not in that specific vacant lot, right? So I think that's the challenge that we face is when you have something that's positive and you have something that's proposed right in front of you, you have to make the tough decisions on, is this truly what we think as legislators that the neighborhood would benefit from or community members would benefit from? I don't think NIMBYism played as huge of a role as maybe some of my other colleagues might feel. I think there was great discourse in our Speak to Council sessions. People argued, well, maybe move it just a block north. So to me, that also says that, there's a desire for this housing in that community. There just was an affinity for this very specific vacant lot in this very specific location. That being said, we put out an RFP. When we put out an RFP and we get a response, it's our job as legislators, once the administration chooses one, to decide if that is how we want to move forward. What's in front of us is what's in front of us. We don't get to change course on a particular project. And I think in the case of this and this specific project, we had a great, excellent proposal in front of us. I think even the neighbors who were opposed to moving it to a housing project thought the proposal itself was great. So that to me was one of the factors that weighed into my decision on this. And I do think that we have to be mindful that in this community and specifically at that site, we're not building a ton of housing in those neighborhoods anymore. There's not a lot of available green space that will allow for us to build home ownership opportunities in that community. And so when we have an opportunity in front of us, we need to take advantage of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a couple of things. I'm sure, I know how fast the hour goes by in these conversations, so I got to get a couple of things off of my chest. First of all, I want to be clear. I don't think that the neighbors, the neighbors approach this from a NIMBY mindset, and I think you can verify that by the fact that the Inner Loop East is incredibly mixed income. That is one of the great successes of the Inner Loop East, is that we built it and created a huge amount of wonderful mixed income residential opportunities. Very few of them for sale, which is what partially makes this different. But I don't think that the NIMBYism was the driving force. And I think the Grove Place neighbors and the East End neighbors right there are people who genuinely want to see more people, more diverse neighborhoods. But there's two other things I just want to note that I think are super important. One, no one in this, well, I'm certainly not a developer and you're not a developer.
Correct.
But one thing that I've learned over time is that what's underground matters quite a bit. This lot was built for a density. It is going to be so much cheaper and easier to build on it because the utilities are already there. It's already set up for this. You can't say that about every single vacant lot in the city. It just doesn't work that way. This is shovel ready, ready to go. And the city built it so that there could be something on there. The other thing that I think has to be mentioned is, because Miguel keeps using the words green space, and so do I. For anyone who's not familiar with this project, I want to be really clear about something. The city of Rochester would never in a million years take land that was parkland and turn it into housing. Even the Cobb's Hill Village.
You're not building housing in the Highland Bowl.
Correct. Even the Cobbs Hill Village project, which is the only other time that I saw such opposition to building something, was land adjacent to a park, but it had been zoned to not be a park for 70 some odd years. We invest in parks in Rochester. We have a ton of wonderful parkland. We just spent $3 million updating MLK Park, which is 0.4 miles away. We just planted 6,000 trees to address an unequal tree canopy around the city of Rochester. These are investments that we make. It's not as though we're saying, like, let's find a green space and tear it up. This lot was built for density. And so it's our job to make sure that we have density where it allows, where it can exist.
So let's listen to some of the comments. The first comment is from Councilmember Mary Lupien, who could not be on the program today. But this is from not the vote meeting this week, not the meeting this week, but this from a couple weeks ago. And a committee meeting in which she is talking about the reason that she was likely to vote no. Let's listen.
I understand when you're looking at affordable housing versus green space, it makes it seem like a NIMBY issue. I also want to highlight that this is about how many people does this property serve. With the proposal, it would serve 20 people. 9 of the ADUs, as far as I know, I didn't ask this question, are not guaranteed to be affordable. So we are talking about 11 homeowners versus an entire community who really values this space. So I just want to make it clear that this is not about NIMBY affordable housing in their backyards. I would submit that there are quite a few affordable housing projects built in the same exact area when the East Inner Loop was filled. So this, for me, is about how many people does this serve? Is this going to serve our residents that we're talking about in terms of, fine, 60% of AMI, but as it stands, I don't think that that is going to actually be affordable.
That's Mary Lupien. A couple points there. Number one, she's saying how many people will each possibility serve? The current iteration of the space is green space, open space. And she says that serves hundreds of people throughout the year. She says the housing that would be built there would serve 20 people. And if you just look at that as a math problem, she says, who are we serving more? And is that part of the calculation for you, President Meléndez?
I mean, you certainly think about those things, but the reality is there's going to be 11 families, hypothetically, because we're speaking in hypotheticals. There's 11 families that are going to gain equity in these housing units. There's going to be at least 9 of those families that will have access to a second unit that they can rent to help cover the cost of their mortgage. This is an innovative and unique project, and I think that, when you look at some of the questions and concerns and comments. By the way, I want to just shout out to my colleagues that were opposed to this, that I think even in their opposition had positive discourse on this with the body, and we need more of that. I want to acknowledge that, but I think this was a no-brainer for me in terms of the opportunity to develop a site and create generational wealth. We don't get to do that often in the city. And while there's many units that were built in that Inner Loop East project, none of which were for homeownership.
I don't know why the council member said it would be 20 people affected by the house. I presume it would be more.
Yes.
I assume it would not be one person per unit. But regardless, you could still make the argument that even if it's 50 or 100 people who would be benefiting from the housing, it could be hundreds who use the open space as it currently is constructed. Go ahead.
Yeah, but in that vein, though, we also, this is not done in a vacuum, right? So just north of this, it's going to be a few blocks north of this, as part of Inner Loop North, we are restoring an old Olmsted Park, Anderson Park. Right now, it's a small little sliver. You wouldn't notice it if you drove by it. But that is an existing public park that is going to restore to original form. It's going to be larger than 125 Charlotte Street. And it's part of a bigger plan. We got to think bigger picture on these things. And this is not a park poor neighborhood. When you look at the East End area, generally speaking, and that district specifically, and frankly, the city of Rochester generally, we have a lot of green space and opportunities and known parkland. And this neighborhood specifically, there's at least 7 sites within walking distance of that particular site where there is green space that exists or that is pending to exist soon.
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate Miguel's diplomacy. I think it's a functionally bad argument that was made there on the tape. Like, we don't talk about serving people with access to a place to sit on a bench is not the same as serving people in terms of putting a roof over people's head or a home to own. You know, we wouldn't have that conversation about a surface level parking lot, which serves how many thousands of people on an annual basis. You wouldn't compare a surface level parking lot to a home. And again, you know, back to Councilmember Patterson's original point, we had the same council members who voted against this housing proposal also voted against selling a school building to become another school building on the grounds that they wanted more affordable housing instead of a school there. I say all that because this is an axiom that we all have to understand. We only get out of the housing crisis by building more housing. And we're not going to get out of the housing crisis with one parcel or two parcels or three parcels. Every time we have an opportunity to build good projects, especially projects that are not being paid for by subsidies from the city of Rochester, which is another thing we should talk about, is where the kind of overall funding may come from to build something like this. It is our obligation, I believe, to address the housing crisis by building more housing. And is 11 units going to solve the problem for us as a city? No. But if every parcel we had a chance to build 11 townhouses and had good opportunities to build 11 townhouses, we would begin to chip away at it in a lot better way. Also, the argument ended, the clip you played ended with saying that, and this was something that Councilmember Lupian said regularly, she's not convinced of the affordability of the actual houses.
That's right. She said, I'm not sure it's truly affordable.
To be clear, nobody can go buy houses right now in the East End or anywhere in the East District for $160,000, which is somewhere roughly around what these are going to be priced for. It just doesn't happen. You can hardly buy a house for that much money anywhere in the city. And if you're making 60% AMI, which is, you know, roughly $50,000 for an individual person or $70,000 for a family of four, something around there, and you're competing on the open market for housing with people, you're outbid all the time. That is the nature of the house. That is why we say we're in a housing crisis, because there's not enough inventory. Rental properties have massive waiting lists. And so these 11 townhouses, with 9 of which will have ADUs attached to it, will be only for people who make 60% AMI. That is the nature of the funding stream they're going after. So for 11 people, they're going to have an opportunity that they cannot get anywhere else. That's just factual.
Okay. President Meléndez, this is also something that you're going to hear Councilmember Martin in a moment with her remarks address, which is this truly affordable? Do you want to add to that question on, you know, because I take the point, I don't think Councilmember Gruber's point can really be disputed, that $160,000 is now a generation ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, not now. However, I think the other council members might say, fine, but how many people can afford 160?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think these questions emerged as we went through the process. And one of the things that I did in my due diligence was ask our Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development to give us the pencil math, right? What does this actually look like in terms of affordability for someone at 60% AMI? And we looked at the comparison with the Buy the Block program and what some of the units are selling for, which, you know, we're in the 130 to 150 range. And most of the buyers have been on average at 52% AMI. So when we look at the math for what it would take to buy a unit at $160,000 or $175,000, you can make it work with 60% AMI. And the other piece of that is, once you have a unit like this and you have an ADU, you'll have additional income after the fact, after you get your mortgage, to help you pay for your general bills and pay for your mortgage.
Okay. Let's listen to the remarks from Councilmember Stanley Martin. This was at this week's council meeting, and this is her explaining the vote of no.
My vote is a rejection of the idea that we can't have both a green space and affordable housing in the same space. For today, my vote is a no. I did ask for more time in hopes that there would be an opportunity to see how we could hold both in the same space. That wasn't where the body was, and I do respect where we are today. Further, I would say this proposal could have been developed in a way that at the very least considered rebuilding up on Anderson Park and creating an intentional community space for neighbors to gather while building out this development. We still are in very early stages. Looking at the numbers, I will say the 60% AMI from the numbers the administration sent us is less than $50,000. I am concerned about the possibility of this and what that would look like, how much of a person's income it'll cost. There's so many questions I still have unanswered. So right now, today, I can't be a yes.
Okay, so a few points there, and we'll move briefly with the members from council here to respond to that. So Councilmember Martin said this was a hard decision, and the council member wanted more time to study this. There are unanswered questions. Fair or unfair there, President Meléndez?
Well, I mean, I think every time we have a choice in front of us, there's a monthly cycle that we go through. Some members may need additional time.
But did this feel rushed in any way to you?
This did not, because we've been aware of the fact that this was coming for several months. We've had speakers that have come to speak to council, I want to say as far back as January, maybe even further. And then, the proposal that's been in front of us, I think there's been, again, we're talking about the sale of land. We're not talking about the housing project. We're talking about the sale of land. We didn't approve a housing project. We approved a sale of real estate. So we've known about this. I think everyone operates differently, but I feel like there was enough time to make an informed decision.
But you don't approve the sale of land unless it's going to end up, there's a direction here that everyone is aware of.
Sure.
Okay. Did this feel rushed at all to you?
No, not in the slightest.
No. Okay. Councilmember Martin says we've got to find a way to have both more housing and green space. Realistic here?
So this was we have to take words for what they are, right? Like, this particular proposal was a choice between green space and the housing proposal that came to us. And to Miguel's point, we're not approving the housing proposal. They still have to go through a ton of different approvals with the planning commission, with funding,
et cetera. But it's going to be housing.
Yeah, it's going to be that housing. It's going to be that particular project with some probably tweaks to it here or there. We had to make a decision, green space or that project. There's not a third way. And so this is actually what concerns me the most, is that this is a harbinger of things to come when it comes to our zoning plan, is that people are regularly going to try to make the argument, well, we can try to have both things. You can't. That lot we had to make a decision. Is it green or is it 11 townhouses, 9 of which with apartments associated? And again, to Miguel's point, we already know there's massive investment coming in green space with Interloop North, and we just committed $3 million to MLK Park, which, by the way, anyone listening who has young kids, the playground there is phenomenal. So we don't have to make a decision between housing and green space in a macro sense, but in a micro sense on that lot, it is the choice. And she chose green space. And yet we're in a housing crisis.
Okay. Lastly, Councilmember Martin did say that construction could have a detrimental impact when it's happening on nearby businesses, and that has to be taken into consideration. President Meléndez?
Yeah, I think in those circumstances, you have to plan for it. And I'm very confident in our neighborhood and business development department that in the consideration of whatever happens there's going to be a thorough plan with how that interfaces with existing businesses, with existing residents, and so on.
Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, the city has made some mistakes on this in the past. I'm not going to deny that. State Street, as many people remember, was under construction for a very, very, very long time, and it had a very detrimental impact on a lot of businesses. So I don't blame anyone for being concerned. I don't blame Ugly Duck and several of the businesses around there for being concerned. It is our job. It is council's job. It is the administration's job. It is our brand new NBD commissioner Eric Frisch and our brand new DES Commissioner Kabuteo Conste's job to make sure that we can do this, learning lessons from State Street and making sure that we bend over backwards to keep every business open during this construction.
Let me get a little bit of feedback, and then after our break, we're going to talk about what is to come in this kind of discussion. And the reason that we're having this conversation on this program is not because, I realize that this half-acre lot, a lot of the people listening today, you may never see it or you may never go there, and you may not live there, of course. But this is what community debates are about how we develop, what we prioritize, what council members are saying and what they're considering, what neighbors are saying, what that looks like, what the process is. And this doesn't just apply to this one site. I mean, I think Council Member Gruber said it well, but it actually goes really to every community. I remember years ago on this program, one of the really kind of heated conversations was in East Rochester. There was the Villa of Hope wanted to build a new group home, and there was a private religious school that said, we don't want you next door. And they worked really hard to rally against it. And to their credit, they came on this program and talked about it. But that was not an easy conversation, if you know what Villa of Hope does. So these conversations happen, and we're talking about everything that's entailed there. Ann in Bloomfield wants to jump in on the phone. Hi, Ann, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. Just a real quick suggestion, I guess. If you could stop using acronyms, you just did it in the last sentence of the MDP and whatever, DES. It just might be easier for people to understand what I know they know what you're talking about, but if you use acronyms, it kind of, to me, loses it. And if you could spell out what those acronyms mean, I think it would be very helpful to everybody in general.
Good note, Ann. Good note for the host especially. Thank you very much. And I'll try to make sure that we do that going forward here. Couple of emails. Ben in Charlotte says, if you give people in a city green space and then take it away, people will get angry about it. That shouldn't be surprising. Moving public space to private space, that will make people angry again. That should not be surprising. There's no reason to necessarily make a false choice between two options. Plan for a micro park so people can continue to have that space. Plant some sizable trees. I've seen some of the trees the city has planted. Sure, the numbers sound great, but it doesn't help if the trees that are planted are so fragile that they snap in mild windstorms. But that's a separate conversation. Ben in Charlotte.
So this is a great point. This is a great point, and it's something that we really need to talk about. I mean, again, this parcel was initially slated for development back in 2019, Miguel?
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be a child care center. And the developer of the property ultimately couldn't make the child care center work. And so they eventually sold the lot back to the city. Okay, so bear with me. Now we have it's publicly owned, city owns it, but it was meant to be developed. It was already sold to a developer and sold back. We had a choice. Sit and wait for it to be developed and keep it under gravel with construction fencing around it, or make it usable for people. But to the caller's point, the moment it became usable for people, now it feels like it can't change again. I think the city did the right thing by making it a nice space for folks to use. And I think this is the right thing again by saying, okay, now is the time for development. And we got a great project. I would not have voted for just any development, by the way. This is a particularly good project for right there for a number of reasons. And it's hard. When you made it public, you made it harder to pull it back to private. But it was always slated for private. So what's a legislator to do in that situation? There's no right answer.
And again, Ann's point about making sure people understand the full scope of this, maybe I should have said right at the beginning, this is the filled portion of the Interloop. This is Interloop East, we've been saying. But in 2014, the city engineer was on this program talking about this is going to happen, and people said this will never happen. Well, it's happened, and now the Interloop North will be filled next, and there will be more discussion about what goes there. This is the filled portion, and it was always slated for some kind of development. Now, I take Ben's point that when people get green space and you take it away, they might be upset.
Sure.
Yeah. And that can be difficult, but that's part of the totality of the conversation.
But then do we never make it green space in the first place when we know there's going to be 5 years before it's developed? That's the hard part.
Yeah, I can understand that too. Okay, and two more here. Abigail says, the people involved with this project are disregarding the thoughts of the neighborhood and making lives difficult. Christian writes in to say, it sounds like council is subverting the will of the people. Do your guests agree? Councilmember Gruber, do you agree that you're subverting the will of the people with this vote?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. What people have said more than anything else I've heard about the issues facing our city right now. It's that we have a housing crisis. We hear it from everyone: renter, owner, realtor, economist, community member, anyone. Housing crisis. There is one solution for a housing crisis, and that is building more housing. So yes, there were 800 people that signed a petition, all of which was not in opposition to this project, but was rather a generic, do you want to keep the space green? I value those people's opinion. Many of them are my friends. I will say that Grove Place and that particular part of the East End are places where I spend a lot of time, and these are people who I respect and love dearly. But it is my job as a legislator of this city, as an at-large council person, to be thoughtful about how do we address the housing crisis and the concentration of poverty, and this was a great project to do so.
Councilmember Meléndez, Abigail says you're making lives difficult, and Christian says you are subverting the will of the people.
Yeah, I appreciate the insight and the feedback and the thinking on that, but I definitely disagree. Mitch said most of what I would say. We have difficult choices that come in front of us all the time. This is such an important project in terms of creating new assets in the community. We have adequate green space in that community, and we're adding more. And if we weren't adding any more green space, I would understand that people may have some concerns or arguments, but we're talking about new green space just 1 or 2 blocks away from the existing site. And frankly, if I get the choice between 11 opportunities for someone at 60% AMI to own a home or to leave it where it is, I'm going to choose the 11 opportunities for home ownership.
Where were you both on the school building that you had talked about and that Councilmember Patterson had referenced? Should the school building have become housing?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Mitch and I probably have the same opinion on this. We wrote an op-ed years ago related to the conversion of school buildings into affordable housing. And I believe in that, generally speaking. But the proposal that was in front of us was a response to an RFP. And there is a school that is hoping to open up.
Back it up for a second.
Yep.
RFP, you got it.
Request for proposal.
AMI and RFP.
Yes. All right.
So AMI.
Area median income.
Okay, and that is a statistic that is used in what ways?
So it's a calculation that's provided from the federal government on the affordability of the unit.
Okay, and then RFP is a request for proposals.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're responding to reacting to a request for proposals that was in front of us, and essentially the choice was: do we sell this school building to another potential charter school, or do we hold on to this property? And unfortunately, we didn't have the votes to sell the particular school building, and I'm concerned that that entity will not be able to open up their high school in the fall. So there's some unintended consequences with decisions like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to share a little bit. I won't hog the mic for too long here, but I'm not super supportive of selling old school buildings to charter schools, and here's the reason why. And first, let me back up. The city of Rochester gets any building that the Rochester City School District surrenders and says we're no longer operating a school out of. As long as they're operating a school, it's their property, but when they say we're surrendering it, it goes back to us. And so we don't want to own school buildings for pretty obvious reasons. It wouldn't make sense for the city to own these buildings in perpetuity. So we then try to sell them quickly. My concern about selling them to charter schools is that I've heard superintendent after superintendent say, well, this is why we don't give you guys your buildings back. You know, if you look at a building like Marshall up on Ridgeway, a beautiful school building, hasn't been used as a school in over a decade. I want that building back. I want to do something great with it. I don't think we're going to get that building because I think the district is petrified of it becoming a charter school. So I really wish that there was a different proposal for this, but I voted in favor of it because this is a charter school that's providing great educational opportunities for kids in Rochester. But more importantly, I think for the sake of a council member, this building is going to require millions of dollars of work just to make it a school again, because the district tends to give us properties in disrepair, as you can probably imagine. Mm-hmm. So not everyone has a housing proposal that's ready to go prime time. and turn an old building in disrepair into functioning apartments. What's distressing to me is that the people who voted against it aren't voting against it and saying, here's a better plan. It's for the city to hold on to a building that has massive upkeep costs. That's not good for any of the taxpayers of Rochester. So I voted for it. It wasn't my favorite project, but that's sometimes what the economic realities are.
After we take our only break, we'll work in more feedback, and we're going to talk about where this discussion may go next in the city of Rochester and perhaps wherever you may live. We've got members of council, Miguel Meléndez, the president of Rochester City Council, Mitch Gruber, a member of council, and we'll come right back on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. This is Brandon in Rochester on the phone. We're going to try to get as much feedback as we can in and get a little bit more discussion on the issue, that kind of the umbrella issue in the city. Keep it tight, Brandon. Go ahead.
Hey, Evan. The one thing I wanted to say was my background is specifically in urban economics. I wrote my thesis in urban economics. I read the research basically every day. And the one thing I wanted to reply to was the people who are, writing the petitions and saying that the leaders are subverting the will of the people. And frankly, I hope that they continue to do that, because the evidence is extremely clear that NIMBYism is essentially only going to exacerbate any housing crisis. And the leaders who are elected need to ensure that NIMBYs don't inject their, opinions into making lives worse for everyone else.
Brandon, thank you for the phone call. Anything you want to add here, council members?
No.
Okay, we're going to let that stand. Brandon, I do appreciate the phone call. Thank you. On YouTube, the reason we asked about the school was just to understand. Some people on our YouTube chat were asking, well, why are they not supporting housing in the school building? Why were they wanting housing in the green space? And during a brief break, they added to the conversation, which we should say on the air, there is no formal proposal for housing in that old school building. Is that correct?
I wish there was. We did not receive any proposals for housing.
Okay, so you didn't vote against a housing proposal in the school?
No, we did not.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that.
And let me say one thing was it Brandon?
Brandon's
call?
Thanks, Brandon.
I mean, this is. I appreciate him bringing in the kind of academic research. We've talked about the Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson book, Abundance.
Yes.
That there is no better story of abundance in Rochester.
This is the abundance story to you?
This is, it's Cobb's Hill Village. It's what's going to come with the zoning code alignment in a couple.
And give the brief description of what you mean by the abundance story.
Yeah. So the abundance argument is, or kind of the question that set off abundance, this book that was written last year, is why is it harder why is the housing environment worse in incredibly blue democratic places like New York and California, which has the two worst housing markets, and why is it better in places like Texas? And I hate to summarize it so kind of crudely, but the argument that Ezra Klein would give is in part this kind of idea of everything bagel liberalism, where we try to have every single interest group has their own reality and agenda to push, and at the end of the day, it's very hard to find our way into believing very strongly about one thing or another.
Or the everything bagel approach might block something from getting done.
Correct, which in this case, again, it's a clean, simple argument. If we have a housing crisis because we don't have enough inventory in the market and because rental rates are high, the way we address that that demand problem is by increasing supply. So the abundance argument would be, oh my goodness, in a democratic city with democratic leadership, here is a proposal to have 11 home ownership opportunities for people who are otherwise boxed out of the housing market, income qualified in a neighborhood that desperately needs more home ownership opportunities. What a slam dunk. And yet it was a slog. It was an absolute slog to get even to 7 votes. And this is the harbinger of things to come with our zoning code. So Brandon's point is interesting. I'm not going to say it the same way because, again, I'm not going to ascribe malintent to the people who are arguing against this for the most part. I will say that I think that it was short-sighted voting from some of my colleagues, but not malintent from the people who ultimately were opposed to it. But that is what we have to do as legislators, is be able to look at the entire scope of a housing crisis in Rochester and what do we do to address it.
Okay, Anna Maria in Penfield next. Hey, Anna Maria, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this program. It's excellent. I just want a quick clarification. Is the issue one of finances for people to move into the housing unit, or no?
No. Sorry, Miguel, do you want to?
Yeah, so essentially there's, based on the funding mechanisms that the potential developer is looking to utilize in the state of New York, there's going to be some income requirements that you can't exceed to be able to purchase these properties. And this will allow for people who wouldn't normally buy property in the East End to have an opportunity to purchase property in the East End.
Okay. My thinking was if there is someone, or probably several someones, who could not afford, say, the down payment or whatever, I would be more than happy to donate $1,000.
That's very kind of you, Anna Maria.
Very kind.
The reality is that once these are built, there will be no shortage of people who are income qualified, who are ready to buy it. There will be banks lined up, eager to give people mortgages, first home ownership classes, eager to help people understand how to best kind of keep and preserve the down payment. So appreciate your generosity. I'm sure there's plenty of nonprofit organizations who work in housing who would love to have you help and support. But that's not the issue here. The issue here was whether or not we should keep this parcel a park or a green space for people who love it like a park, or whether we should build housing that will be for people who are income qualified.
Anna Maria, you got a big heart. Thank you for that phone call. And then briefly, Jillian in Charlotte says, I'm so impressed with our council people with the thoroughness and thoughtfulness of their comments and reasoning. But on this particular project, I don't think it's a good project. If I'm understanding correctly, the way owners can help pay their bills is to have to become landlords. That's a big responsibility. I was a part of the group fighting this, and as a low-income person myself, had mixed feelings right up to the end, and we were told that the units would be sold at $175 to $200K. $160 was never mentioned, she said. So let's just back up briefly. What's the number? 160 is the number I'm hearing now.
There's not a specific number until all the financing is secured, but all that will be public information. Again, as Miguel said before, this was just selling the real estate.
Yeah, I think the number 175 comes from the 60% AMI number, so the area median income number. So at 60%, the max I think that one could afford is 175. So they're going to have to make the math work in order to be eligible for the program.
She's saying, in her view, you have to become a landlord to make it work to pay your bills. Do you disagree with that?
I do disagree with that. I think that the 60% AMI number is something that is calculated and is very thoughtful in terms of how we sell these properties. We do it with by the block, I think at 60 or 80% AMI. I think the challenge with becoming a landlord is something that will factor into who decides to buy the properties. And individuals who are looking for those types of opportunities, they are abundant across the city. People are looking for that double or that second unit to be able to afford housing in this community, and this will create an opportunity for that.
And no one has to be a landlord who buys these properties. If you want it to be for your mother-in-law, if you want, yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be a rental property.
The accessory dwelling unit.
Correct.
Yes. In-law suite.
Which
in-law suite, Miguel.
As we run out of time, again, I keep saying this. This is what is going to come with our zoning alignment plan. So I want to call out to people. The Rochester Zoning Alignment Plan has officially been released by the Evans administration. I believe it's rochesterzap.com.
I believe so.
Or maybe org, but Rochester Zap, you can post it afterwards. It is a draft plan for anyone to read. We're going to go through 4 to 5 months of public discourse around the zoning plan. And I promise you, every single piece of it is going to be a question of how dense do we want to come. Rochester once had 330,000 people in it. We have 210,000 people now. We have had zoning code after zoning code that assumes decline. It is time for us to have a zoning code that assumes growth, that facilitates growth. And with that growth will come so many more issues and arguments like 125 Charlotte Street. We have to have legislators, we have to have community groups, we have to have leadership in this community that understands that the only way we get ourselves out of a housing crisis and build a city for growth is by having more housing opportunities for people.
Okay. We'll be talking about zoning in the weeks and months to come. I promise you that. Last two quick questions as we close. Scott says, hey, the problem with the lot would be moot if the city had put up a sign. Temporary parking or temporary park or green space, future development coming. Something like that. Miguel?
I think that is very wise and lesson learned for the Evans administration.
Okay. And Bob wanted to know, will the people that get these homes be taxed out in a few years?
So there's a whole bunch of state programs that are going to address that directly. My answer is no, they won't. And I think people should go to the block by block program page at the New York State website and see how that program works.
Thank you both for coming in. And boy, in the last 10 minutes, we've just exploded with feedback. So if we didn't get to yours, these council members have email addresses and they've probably heard from nobody on this. So they probably love to hear. No, listen, everybody tries to get as much feedback publicly as we can. Council does, we do, and I know there's a great deal of interest not only in this project, this debate, but what is to come, and we will continue to cover that. And I think Councilmember Gruber says that well. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
President of Council Miguel Meléndez, Member of Council Mitch Gruber. More connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.